Yeah, exactly. One. All right, hello everybody. Look at this. Look where we are. Isn't it amazing? This is why we got a truck. Can you just swing round and show the truck? See, that's why we got a truck. That's our campaign truck there. Because we are in the middle of beautiful Marin County. We're just next to an amazing town called Bolinas, with the southern end of the Point Reyes National Seashore.
Yes.
The very southern end.
I can tell you a lot about Point Reyes. We'll do that another time. We'll go there for different reasons. But we're here with two very special people, and that's what we're here to do today: is to learn about a story that first caught my eye in January. We were just talking about this, about farmers and ranchers who've been here for so many years being threatened by ridiculous bureaucracy that makes no sense. So that story, as you know, I'm very, very committed to everything to do with food and farming and agriculture and doing that well, and California leading the world and all of that stuff. And so this story really, really got me going. And I said at the time, I want to come back here, learn more about it. And now I can share that with all of you. But first of all, let's introduce Bill and Nicolette. This man is a legend. If you know anything about the food world and farming, just tell them who you are and you introduce yourselves, and then we'll get going.
Okay, my name is Bill Nyman. I'm the founder of Nyman Ranch, which is pronounced Nyman, not Niemans, for those of you who are in doubt. And about the early mid-'70s, I began to assemble a group of like-minded farmers from our community, and that grew one farm at a time and one customer at a time. Fortunate to be in kind of the epicenter of where California cuisine, maybe modern American cuisine, was born, and I had some great tutors both on the ranching side as well as on the culinary side. The divas of California cuisine, Alice Waters, Judy Rogers, and Margaret Fox, they taught me the way it was supposed to be, so I was very fortunate in that. Our enterprise expanded over the years, and we began to find ranchers in locales where cattle belonged, in the northwest of the United States primarily. We moved our cattle operations up to Idaho. We left our pig operations in California for those in the Corn Belt, which made sense. And we embraced a lot of farmers that were raising their pigs in what was a sensible way, as opposed to the modern factory industrial model. And soon we grew to I think 700 farms, and the epicenter of that was in Iowa, but it went as far as North Carolina, East Nebraska, Missouri, and that was Nyman Ranch.
But this is the original ranch where we are right now. This is where it all started and where it's still going on too. We're still raising cattle and chickens.
And we're very proud of that, and especially the eating quality, which was a key driver, even though we checked all the boxes about natural, antibiotic-free, and we pioneered a lot of that. Most importantly to us, and as demanded by our customers, and especially in the Bay Area in New York City, that they had to eat great, otherwise it didn't matter.
Right.
So we're really successful on that.
Have we seen the cows? Just make sure that they're part of our conversation.
Yeah, and this is where it all started. Yeah.
Literally, this is the original ranch.
Yeah, now it's
because you see it on menus. That's why it's very important that people learn how to pronounce it.
Coast to coast, right. And in supermarkets, and thank you Trader Joe's for help launching us into the big scale.
Oh, that's
and
interesting.
Whole Foods. Yeah, but especially Trader Joe's were a great customer.
And if any of you have read my book, More Human, by the way, if you haven't, why not? 2015, the first edition of that, your story is featured there. So honestly, for me personally, it is so amazing to meet you.
Maybe you could help us get into Morrison's.
Okay,
right. I've done work for them in the
very
UK.
Good, very good. And so, Nicolette, tell us your story. What's the
I was actually working as the senior attorney for the environmental group Waterkeeper Alliance. I was working for Bobby Kennedy Jr. He was my boss, and we were concerned about the way modern farming had become so industrialized and so dependent on chemicals and no, I will not.
Don't say it again. Yeah.
The way farming had gotten more and more chemical dependent, more fossil fuel dependent, more dependent on sort of large capital intensive structures and long distances, et cetera. Just kind of more, we kind of thought of it as industrialized.
Industrialized. Well, that's exactly what I was writing about in More Human.
Yeah,
the food chapter of More Human is all about that.
Yeah, and I think that Jason, was he your co-author on that book? He came and interviewed us for that book. Right here at this ranch. So it's funny that we're kind of going full circle here. But I did that work. I started in 2000. I was hired by Bobby Kennedy to be the environmental attorney for that group. And then after I'd been there a couple of years, I left that job, but I began writing about agriculture and sustainability, and I've written 3 books. The most recent one is called Defending Beef. And along the way, I met Bill and the people in his company. Yeah. And relations the Nyman Ranch folks as an example of a really good way to raise animals and produce really healthy food. And then we ended up getting married along the way too. So, and then I moved out here, and although I was an environmental lawyer, I started working on the ranch. And so for about 7 years, I actually worked full-time on the ranch and was writing. And
wonderful.
These days, I'm doing a lot of kind of advocacy around sustainability and good food, and still very involved in both our own ranch and the local community as far as food and agriculture.
It's a fantastic story. It really is. And what I love about it is you've always had this combination of doing things well, but as you said, not just without sacrificing quality and flavor and everything, but like enhancing those things. That's the whole point.
Yep.
Exactly. In fact, there's more and more research showing that when you raise any food, but in particular when you raise animals well, and grass-based in particular is really important, really valuable, you create more nourishing food. So there's a direct connection between the way things are farmed and the healthfulness of the people that are consuming it. And we're very passionate about that too.
Yeah, all driven by nature.
Yes.
It's all. So when we need cattle in certain months of the year, we go to the southern hemisphere. Okay, we have like-minded people that we work with in New Zealand and Australia because the seasons are exactly the opposite.
Right.
And if you want to harvest fresh beef, you have to harvest them at the right time. And that's driven by the condition of the grasses, which vary from one month to the next. Yeah.
And the other thing I'll just say before we get into the story that really brought us here today, I think it's so interesting. Actually, very recent, you mentioned Bobby Kennedy. His role in the recent presidential election, and then and what to make America healthy again, has just really rocketed all these issues up to the top of the agenda. It's amazing, isn't it?
And I like to take a little bit of credit for that, because when I started working for Bobby Kennedy, there was just a little bit of work being done on agriculture, and I was the person who really helped launch that full-scale campaign on that
interesting
issue. And
so before that it was chemicals focused, was that?
Well, we had a few kind of
and animal welfare, industrial
but
models.
this was that all started when I came on board and began doing it in a concerted way.
Understood.
There were individual cases that had been involved.
That's why I married you.
You wanted me to help you with your operation the way I had done it for them. No, but there was work that was being done on the issue. But Bobby actually asked me to start on the issue nationally, and we did that. And the issue was not just about the pollution; it was about the healthfulness of the food, the impact on the people in the communities and the animals, and really thinking about food and agriculture in a more holistic way. And let's think about it in a healthful way. How are we going to produce healthy animals that produce healthy food and create healthy landscapes and communities for people to live in? And it's just so commonsensical.
And that's why it's so wonderful that you can all see it, because and feel it. And I'm just look, it's so beautiful, it's wonderful. All right, I want to talk about the immediate story here. Yeah. So the headlines were ranchers who've been on this land for 100 years are being kicked off, have been kicked. So tell us what's been going on here. And why.
We can either one of us can talk about it. But
yeah, and it could be hundreds of years.
Right.
We're not part of that special group. I've been here for 50, 60 years. But the people who are north of here and on the actual peninsula.
So that's Point Reyes, which is that direction.
Correct.
Right. Yeah.
Those people are almost all can trace back to the original settlers, which was just around the 1850s, around that time, plus or minus a few years, and a very rich tradition of pastoral agriculture.
Multi-generational pastoral agriculture, and primarily
very thoughtful and human scale. That kind of stuff.
And beef, what are they doing there?
And based on grass. So beef and dairy cattle.
Historically, they were all dairy. But
grazing animals.
Yeah.
And really...
And that area is known for it. You've got some really... you go to Point Reyes Station, which is the main town there. Yeah. Got these incredible, Cowgirl Creamery is one of the famous brands. The dairy produce...
Strauss Dairy.
Strauss, it's really
Ranch.
rich.
These are all
and the
brands.
reason they kind of sprung out of this area is not an accident. Because these are really some of the most optimal hills upon which to graze cattle.
Right.
You have this kind of perfect climate. We're right next to the ocean here. Yeah. And it's a kind of a temperate climate.
That is just there, literally where the cloud, you can just see on the edge.
Literally just past where those trees are is where the ocean is. Yeah. And so you have this very sort of optimal environment for grass. And also, interestingly, not for other kinds of agriculture. So you don't have the heat that you would need to grow crops. And it's also very hilly, as you can see, rolling hills. And there's a lot of, kind of rocky and, gullies and all that sort of thing. That's the natural topography of this area. So it's perfect for grazing animals. And going way back, hundreds of years, we were talking to some friends the other day who are very familiar with the culinary history of the Bay Area. And they were talking about how this area was known for some of the best butter and milk going way back into the mid 1800s. And so there was always this long history of producing really high quality food, and specifically dairy and beef. But there's this very long history, and as Bill said, most of the families in the Point Reyes National Seashore trace their origins back multi-generational. Bill is one of the few people who doesn't have that long history. He's been here for decades.
Newcomer.
A newbie, exactly. Only 60 years.
But so I'm a real newbie because I've only been here for 22 years.
So what's happened this year?
Well, this has been going, it's not just this year.
Okay.
Yeah. It's been going on for quite a while now. And the Park Service has been...
The National
Park Service.
Because it's Point Reyes National Seashore.
Exactly.
Is the whole area. Yeah. Right.
And they've been trying to have deploy management plans that would please everyone.
Okay. And
we thought we had a really comprehensive plan that would allow everybody to stay on the land and continue to do what they're doing with leaseholds. And this was something that was mandated by the Founding Fathers of Congress, as well as reestablished in 1978. And so we...
Well, just to make sure everyone understands, when the park was created in the early 1960s, these ranches and farms were here. This way, as well as the ones that we're talking about that are multi-generational, hundreds of years old farms. And when the Point Reyes National Seashore was created, it was with the cooperation of these farmers and ranchers, because people felt there was a lot of development pressure and there was a lot of concern about losing this beautiful place and losing these pastoral landscapes. And so it was envisioned that this would be preserved. Both as a wild area, because the majority of the land is preserved as non-agricultural, and it's all different kinds of wilderness designations. I don't know all of them, but and then there's a portion, which is less than a third of it all, is the agricultural zone. Okay. And so that started way back at the founding of the park, which was in the 1960s.
Yes.
And there was always the feeling and the belief that that should and would continue, even though the arrangement with most of the ranches, not with our particular ranch, but with most of them, was actually to purchase the ranch and then allow the family to stay with long-term leases.
Got it.
Okay. And then what happened in January was, not to cut you off if you want to do
No, go ahead.
He usually says, can you do the talking, please? So I feel free to say.
I have a random stream of consciousness.
Good. That's always
Nicolette
most
is very
interesting.
linear.
We love it.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm more at telling things in order. I'm better at that. But what happened in January was there was an announcement of a deal that had been over 2 years in the making, but it was entirely done behind closed doors. And the deal would be essentially a buyout of 11 of the remaining ranches, and there were only 13, so it was almost all of them. We were one of the only two that would not be leaving. We had not been part of those negotiations at all, and we knew there were rumors, but everyone who was involved in that was required to sign a non-disclosure agreement. So even though in 2021 there was a management plan that had been published that contemplated long-term preservation of the ranches and their families and the operations, long-term lands, new leases, and also just kind of assistance to the families to help them keep ranching. Then there was a lawsuit by some outside environmental organizations, not local community groups, but from the outside, who challenged that, and it resulted in this closed-door negotiation.
Between who?
Between, in theory, the Park Service, the federal government claimed that they were not involved, but it's become clear from some reporting that they invited the Nature Conservancy in to try to basically buy out these ranches. And there was a couple of years negotiation between the Nature Conservancy and the ranches.
Right, so the ranches were part of the process.
Yes. They were required to sign a non-disclosure agreement.
With little choice, really.
Why?
Yeah, because the regulations that were coming into this the park management plan was so restrictive that it would be impossible to do your business and to maintain it in a sensible way because of the restrictions on the land use as well as the capital requirements.
Right.
So there was just no convergence at all.
What were the capital requirements? Building?
Well, just your fencing, your water lines, all of it. And we're on a month-to-month lease on 560 acres. It's we have to put a new water line in. Now it's $10,000. We got fencing to do 20, 30.
Right.
And then we have restrictions on the number of animals we can run.
Right, so you can't make it pay.
And the number of animals has been getting ratcheted down every
So this is coming from
years.
The Park Service.
Yes, but also the state has a layer of requirements that are also overlaying everything, right? So agriculture, especially dairies, but all of it is
they're much
regulated.
less problematic than the park regs. But
okay, I've got somebody. Is the intent all along, do you think, from the Park Service, the federal government, to we don't want ranching anymore, we just want it to be a park? Is that really what's been driving this?
The attitude does shift depending on who's in the White House, right? But it was stated in the past at various different points that long-term leases would be provided because it's been recognized that you can't make the kinds of investments that you need to make, right? Unless you get to stay for a while. Right, it's ridiculous. From a business standpoint, it's just not possible to do it, right? So,
and it requires long-term planning.
Yeah,
but what we have learned is that in this past administration, during the Biden years, that this negotiation was taking place, and that when President Trump was elected, there was an effort to quickly finish up the deal.
Got it.
Because it was quite well known that the whole deal probably wouldn't be supported by the new administration.
Okay. So what is driving it? Why did they think ranching on this land is a bad thing for the environment?
Well, I think there's a few different things, and you'll, I'm sure, have some things you want to add to this too. But having worked for environmental groups myself, I worked for National Wildlife Federation, and I also worked for Bobby Kennedy Waterkeeper Alliance. There's been a feeling in a lot of the sort of environmental advocacy world that agriculture in general is problematic, no matter how it's done.
Right.
And what's been happening more and more is that a lot of environmental groups are increasingly also animal rights organizations.
Okay.
And so there's a kind of anti-animal agriculture agenda.
Right, of whatever kind.
Right. It doesn't matter how well you're doing it.
What is that acronym? The stock, what's that acronym? Because the Sonoma, there was that measure just last.
Yeah, Measure J.
Measure J. And what's that acronym for, like, animal feedings. There's something.
What's it?
CAFOs.
Right.
Concentrated
Yes.
animal feeding operation.
Okay.
Right, and that Measure J is a great. I'm glad you brought that up because
really
this is a great
Steve.
example of the kind of thing that's been happening
Right.
Nationally, and the whole idea behind Measure J in Sonoma County was they were kind of it was kind of a cloaked in an environmental ideology that we're kind of focus on the worst offenses in terms of and the worst offending operations, and we're going to require kind of smaller scale family operations. But the truth is the kind of big, and I know because this was professionally what I did for several years, the big, really polluting, problematic kinds of operations don't exist in Sonoma County. Okay,
Right.
So it was completely absurd.
I know. I went to meet. It's
Yeah.
like, what are you talking about?
Right.
We don't
Really,
have.
really.
Right. These are
They're
family
models for
owned,
modern,
small
smart,
scale.
sensible
A lot
farm.
of them are, grass-based operations, and it's really
They're
a
small compared to what's going on or New Mexico or Idaho and dairy.
Yeah, I
but
mean the vast majority of food is coming
properly scaled though.
from much larger operations,
Yes.
and these are much more kind of providing food for the local and regional kind of food shed, and people that are family owned and operated, and they're running their own farms, and they're making a living from it. This is exactly the kind of food people want.
I know.
Especially in the Bay Area, right? Yeah. So why would you go after that? And I think the people who are fighting against Measure J did a great job of telling that story.
Yes.
And as you probably know, that was defeated 85% to 15%. Yes. So the agenda, which was really driving that, really became, I think, kind of laid bare.
Right.
And it was soundly rejected. And people said, no, we actually want to have animal farming in our community, and we want to have this kind of animal farming. Okay.
And so it's the same thinking.
It's
that
very
informs...
similar situation
right.
here. You have these truly family owned and operated. All of the dairies in the Point Reyes National Seashore, every single one of them are organic, certified organic. And they're all should be trying to have more of.
And
right?
people should come and visit to see how their food is produced.
Yes,
right?
but
and
the
how
Park Service doesn't really allow people to come
in harmony with wildlife.
I know.
People would, I think, love race and.
I know. Well, I mean, I do. I'm just so. Often come out here, and it's a wonderful. I mean,
you can walk this place anytime you want.
Yes, and you go for hikes in Point Reyes. Either side, there's this long, thin bay, Tamales Bay, which is it's actually the start of the San Andreas Fault, I believe. Is that right? And either side is amazing, and you go for these hikes, and you see actually on all around there, you see the agricultural operations, and you're walking in amongst it.
But what you may not know, walking amongst it, is that if you're in this seashore, all of these farms and ranches, despite having been here for hundreds of years, being certified organic, being grass-based, producing really high-quality food, they're not allowed to have, let's say, for example, a farm stand on their farm because they're in the national seashore. You're not allowed to have, we've tried twice to add a new kind of crop to diversify, right?
Yes.
And it was different. One time we wanted to have heritage turkeys, and one time we wanted to have heritage chickens. And we were told, both times, very small scale, grass-based. And we were told by the Park Service in multiple meetings that they really didn't want us to do that.
Right.
Ultimately, they allowed us to do it, but they said because we had a life estate ownership interest for a portion of our ranch, they would let us do it. But only because of that.
It's people who don't understand, actually.
It's
just bureaucracy.
It's insane.
Distant. Are they literally distant? Are they in, I don't know, Washington, D.C. making these judgments?
Yes, a lot of it is. It's drawn on a spreadsheet in Washington, D.C., literally.
Right.
Interesting story. So I'm sitting around the table with the park people a couple months ago, before the lawsuit was filed, talking about what we're going to do here. And they knew we have this breeding flock of pedigree chickens. So we have 4 breeds that we're developing.
Which we're only allowed to have because we have our life estate.
Right.
If we were anywhere else in the seashore, they wouldn't have let us do it.
And it's a small number.
Reminder.
But and they were concerned about that. Because of avian influenza, it may affect the bobcat population on our ranch.
Okay.
And what I explained to them, that this project could change the entire chicken population in the entire world, because we may have a chicken that's resistant to avian influenza.
Wow.
Because we're not using the kind of mainstream industrial produced, similar genetically produced chicken. We have a very different breed.
We're creating a completely new breed.
Right.
That
naturally.
Yes.
Breeding.
Yes. We have 4 different bloodlines that we're crossing.
Yes.
And it's produced the best eating chicken in the world, and we have no illness. Knock on.
Yeah, don't say that.
Yeah.
No one jinx us.
But I tried to explain it. We're not just raising chickens. We're trying to do something so monumental to change the world. But that's typical of what's happening on the farms here. It's not. Nobody is here about scale and doing something volume. It's about doing something big.
Yes.
And something that will
and
have an impact.
Something important.
I remember telling the story when I first went to. I was telling the story about how a Chez Panisse, it's an old digression, amazing pioneer, Alice Waters, of all of the things that we're talking about. And
come, cattle!
Coming to see us.
And,
our cattle are very friendly.
I remember trying to explain to someone what I remember. I said, "We're going to go there." It was
intimate with one of my mentors. Created, the intention was to show how animal agriculture and wildlife can live in harmony together.
Right.
Okay. That was talked about. It wasn't just a fantasy. And that people could walk in this urban fringe park. People could walk amongst wildlife, animals being raised for food, and get in touch with that, which our whole society has lost touch with.
I know.
Yeah.
And then what about, actually, last thing I just want to ask you about, because it's come up in some of the stories, the elk.
Yes.
What's the story with the with the elk?
So the park has done a very poor job of managing the elk. Very poor. But now in 2025...
Because it's an elk refuge. There's one of the trails.
They've actually now taken down the fence that was keeping the elk contained.
Right.
And they made an announcement that essentially they're no longer going to manage them at all. So the bad management is going to go to worse management. They brought these elk here. They were not here. They were brought here by the National Park Service.
Well, they were here historically.
No, but they were reintroduced into this area intentionally. But then they have not done anything to manage them properly.
You can't have dairy and beef cattle side by side with elk unless you have grizzly bears and wolves.
If you are, you're going to have to manage it.
Yeah.
But the park has not.
So is that a separate?
Failing to do that.
Is that a separate issue?
No, it's all part of the same thing, which is just bad management and refusal to manage.
So they want the elk, but not the.
They want the elk, but here's the irony. You have to. I've written books. You know, my Defending Beef book is all about how you need these grazing animals in order to maintain a healthy ecosystem. You need them to create a grassland, to keep the water in the ground, because they actually create not just dense vegetation on top, but a much more healthy
root system. Yes.
Yeah, the biology of the soil on the microscopic level is much healthier when you have the grazing animals. And you have to have a lot of these animals. And what I keep saying to people is, we need more of them, not fewer. And this is absolutely true, in order to maintain these grasslands. And their fantasy...
Because they'll keep the brush down.
And they have all of these impacts. Their hooves, their mouths. Grazing animals are essential for maintaining a healthy grassland, okay? And they want to get rid of the cattle and have a little handful of elk that are going to do this. It's a joke.
One way of getting rid of
the elk are going to do it instead of.
But they're just a few of them, and there's no there are no bears and wolves and etc. that have the kinds of impact you would have on a wild herd in a wild environment, and they're not going to reintroduce.
One way of getting rid of the cattle ranchers is to allow the elk to breed without controls.
Yeah, and that's part of what they've been doing.
And that's what they've been doing.
Yeah.
Yes.
And these elk have a disease which is fatal to the cattle, and they can't be relocated.
And fatal to themselves.
Yeah, it's chronic wasting disease. Yeah, so
it's just so frustrating.
Yeah.
Is there someone here who's in charge of this seashore? There must be a sort of executive director.
There is a superintendent, yes. And it's been a different person every few years.
What do they think about all this? Are they just doing
it's someone who comes in, they're here for a few years, and then they go on.
And they just do the bidding of whatever they're told?
Yes, exactly.
It's about the visuals. They think of their constituency as 2 million visitors.
Right.
It's not 10, 12 ranchers.
I understand.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they always talk about the visuals. You can't do this, you can't do that.
Right. That's another reason that they often deny us things that we want to try to do in management of the land. They'll say, well, that doesn't look good. Whatever the thing is. In fact, we told them in a series of conversations that we wanted to use more electric fencing so we could do more carefully, manage grazing, right, and targeted. And they said, well, we don't really like to have the electric fencing. It's not friendly to people when they're walking through. We said, well, they don't have to touch the fencing.
They don't have to touch it.
They don't even have to be anywhere near it.
Steve, what we're trying to create.
It's very easy to educate people about electric fencing, right? But they just said, no, that's kind of unfriendly to visitors. So there's all kinds of ridiculous stuff.
And what we're trying to create and demonstrate is how to manage this grassland for maximum food production.
Yes.
Maximum nutritional density coming off the land. And that should be an example to people and not only people who are consumers and visitors, but the ranching community. We can create a model here.
Exactly. But that's my vision of all of this, that California is a leader in this. And we should be demonstrating it and bringing people to see it and whatever.
And this is a microcosm of that.
Yes,
there's so much land like this. And like Nicolette said, you can't plant corn and soybeans here, or almonds,
Yes.
or grapes.
Nor would you want to.
I know, exactly. I was with the almonds last week,
Yeah.
and that's perfect for there, but not for here.
Yeah.
All right. Well, listen. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I'm gonna say one political thing, which is this is the kind of thing that has motivated me to run for governor, because I get so frustrated when you see this idiotic stuff being done by the government at whatever level. And we've got to trust people. We've got to it's a little bit like what I was arguing in my book, More Human. We've just got to stop all this nonsense. And it's a big part of why I'm doing it. Thank you, guys. Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Appreciate it.
I hope we can get a Brit in the governor's mansion.
Well, I'm an American now, just to reassure you.
Well,
Thank you for
Thanks so
coming out,
much.
Steve.
Thank you.
I thought you had an accent. Maybe I'm wrong.
Very good. All right. So thank you all for joining us. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you enjoyed the show, and that you appreciate we laid on the cows just for you, the cattle part of the performance here. Hope that was great. We'll see you soon. Thank you.
Gentlemen.